Hello and welcome to the fifth episode of the Angel Bricks podcast, the podcast designed to make investing easier for everyday investors. And today I'm really excited. We've got a guest called Shiv Malik. Shiv is the co-founder and CEO of a new development called Forest City One. Forest City One is the most ambitious housing project which has been done in the UK since the creation of Milton Keynes. So essentially what they're doing is they've taken a site which is 45,000 acres just east of Cambridge, and they're proposing to build 400,000 new homes together with a new city, a modular reactor, a nuclear modular reactor for power supply, a new dam for water, so a reservoir, and a whole bunch of infrastructure, and essentially creating a brand new city in the UK, somewhere where it currently doesn't exist. What they're also doing is they're using something called the community land trust model, which changes the way that the land market operates and the housing market as well. So it's a really, really interesting and super ambitious plan. So I'm super excited to have Shiv on our podcast today. There's a phrase that I keep coming back to: not a crisis, a policy failure. But before we get into everything, give me the shortest version of why those two things are different and why it matters.
It matters a lot. The policy failure sounds like it's easily adjusted. If you have enough policy failures, you end up with a crisis. There are other ways to get to crisis as well. So I think we're in a crisis, and we have been for actually a very long time, at least a decade.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. Paint me the picture, not the planning document version. If somebody woke up in Forest City One in 2040, what would their morning look like? Where are they walking out of? And what are they walking into?
So they're walking into somewhere that's deeply ambitious, where the energy is palpable. This is in the center of the city. They can see monumental buildings, skyscrapers, and the like. And then as they move out and travel beyond that, they'll end up at one of the largest nature reserves in England, in fact, the largest, filled with, trees and woodland and fields and marshes and flocks of birds and insects and huge mammals as well, to kind of, beavers and otters. And then as they move towards their home, and I'm giving you actually the reverse journey, not in the morning, but the evening as they are returning from work, they'll come back to a beautiful, hopefully, fingers crossed, they will be able to retail it at about £350,000, a 4-bedroom house that looks stunning and has real dignity to it. So it'll be a place where they can not just breathe and exist and relax in a wonderful kind of community on a terrace street, but actually also have dignity and raise children, which is deeply important to repairing the social contract. Absolutely.
No, it sounds amazing. And we are going to go into the pricing. So, which is what I was going to do next, which is walk me through the economics. If I buy a home in Forest City One under the CLT model, what do I actually own? What happens if I sell? And why is a 4-bedroom home at £350,000 commercially viable when every developer in the country apparently can't make the numbers work?
So that's a really complex question. Let me put it this way. Basically, you have to get the basics, the cost of the basics down. So that's not just the cost of the building itself, which we should be able to deliver for about 250,000, but then there's land and planning permission. And those are the other main costs to getting things done in Britain. And they can basically go through the roof at any given moment if you get them wrong. So those are the two other things that we're really concentrating on, which means building on greenfield, where agricultural prices are incredibly low compared to, the edge of a city or the edge of a town. And also making sure that we have the government backing this, which means you have to have something at scale and the efficiencies that brings with the development corporation.
Yeah, no, and I think that's key, isn't it? It's the development, it's the quantum of product at scale that you bring, which is what creates the economics. And I think that's really interesting for the UK development model. And it's certainly something that hasn't been tried for quite a long time.
Yeah, I can talk about the CLT stuff as well.
Yes, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, so basically the community land trust, people get really confused. What are you buying here? You're buying the home, the land, not the land? What is it, leasehold? Is it some kind of scam? It's basically this. If we sell a four-bedroom house for £350,000, and in Cambridge, the usual price of a new build of the same size would be £600,000 or £650,000. Well, what are you going to do? On day two after you've bought it, you're going to flip it, aren't you? So that we can't have that writ large over, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of homes. So the CLT is actually just a mitigator against that to say, look, if you buy this and you're getting a massive discount, right, you can't just flip it. You have to sell it back to the city. And depending on how long you live there, you get a bit of uplift. The city gets a bit of uplift when they resell it. And then that money goes back into the city. So the city starts to fund itself. Through the uplift, through this place being a great place to live.
And it's also self-fulfilling as well, because the subsequent buyer is also buying at a much lower price as well, right? So that's locked in that process. Is that correct?
Yeah. And so the discount gets passed down through many generations, not just, one lucky group of people who happen to be there at the right time in the right place.
Yes, it's not like a single lottery winner, is it? It really is something that passes the value down from generation to generation. I think it's a great idea. I think we've talked about this a lot in the past, and I lived in Singapore where obviously HDB is prevalent, and I think these sorts of things are really interesting for the market. Moving on, you submitted a 295-page report to the government. You've got the NFB board behind you. You've got a King's Cross architect on your board. What is the honest answer to what does it actually take from here? Not the optimistic version, but what is genuinely required from politicians, the public, and also the capital?
So again, a really broad question. The shortest way in which to answer that is to say this. A lot of this comes down to this funny, bureaucratic, technocratic phrase, planning permission. And it's the permission part where all the work is. I.e., can we, as a people, as a group of human individuals living in the same place, agree to do this thing? And that is politics, right? So that's actually the bulk of the work, is sitting and talking to people and going, hey, look at the value that this could bring. Look how life would change dramatically for people who have been left out, mainly young adults under 45, basically the millennial and Gen Z generation. This would transform their prospects. And then also me talking to the people who want to live there going, hey, me and my co-founder, Joe Reeve, took it and saying, hey, do you want to live here? Because if you do, show us that demand signal, right? And then these things start to work together. So it's a complex process, but it can be done fairly rapidly if we want it to be.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think these things start with public support, don't they, really? It's about building momentum. Now, sort of moving on to that sort of public realm, you co-wrote a book in 2010 called The Jilted Generation about how Britain bankrupted its youth. How much Forest City 1 is a direct response to the argument that you were making then, and that this generational debt that never got repaid?
So, okay, let me answer this. Shall I answer this in a slightly longer way, or?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So what Jilted Generation said was, look, if we don't, in short, it said, if we don't sort out housing and infrastructure for, I was young then, I was 29 when I wrote it, co-authored it. And I'm not certainly young anymore, so you can see how much time has passed, 15, 16 years. It said, if we don't sort this stuff out, then you're going to end up with a generation of people poorer than their parents. And that's never happened before in sort of economic, recent industrial, post-industrial economic history, 150 years plus in Britain, certainly. Despite there being 2 world wars and other pandemics and stuff like that. Like, that's never happened, right? So something's going horribly wrong if it does. And of course, it has turned out to be that way. So I was tired of being a Cassandra, and I knew what some of the solutions would be. Obviously, build more homes, but it's not as simple as saying that, which is what the government has said. Build 1.5 million homes, and you also have to contend with these other things. Well, what is the political economy of a new place, right? Because you don't want to just build a home and then it's costs as much as anywhere else. Well, what problems are you solving there, right? And if you're going to make them incredibly cheap, then how are you going to mitigate against people suddenly selling them off? And do you just want more council houses, which have never been particularly appealing and obviously are given out on need, right? And there's so much need, the whole of the middle class in Britain for young adults can't afford a home anyway. So
Exactly.
how do you define need in that sense? That's not going to work either. So a lot of it is deep thinking, and it does flow from how do you repair the social contract. That's basically what it comes down to. So Forest City is the attempt, the only attempt going at repairing that social contract directly, which means can you work hard and then buy or rent a home and raise a family? Because if you can't do that in Britain today, which you can't, then your country is totally screwed, which it is.
Yeah, no, I actually agree with all of these things. I think it's an incredibly ambitious plan, and I think I just love the audacity of the whole thing that just basically says, look, do you know what? We're just going to do it and see what happens. And
Yep.
there's something to be said for that. So moving on to the actual Forest City itself. So let's start with the basics, because when people hear new city east of Cambridge, a lot of what people will be picturing is a housing estate with a Tesco, and it's called Forest City. So
Yep.
that I know you're building something much different to that, but I think it's really important to get across the scale, because I think a lot of people haven't really heard of what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. And so give us a bit of a feel for what you're actually trying to achieve here.
Yeah, so most people's, as you pointed out, reference point for new towns, new places is one of two things. So it's kind of the post-war new town stuff. So Milton Keynes, right? Or Stevenage or Harlow. And to be honest, most people who look from the out to the inside think they're horrible, right? Actually, people who live in Milton Keynes love it. There's loads of trees. It's amazing to get around. It's an incredibly productive place, and the quality of life is really, really high. Right, far more productive than Oxford and Cambridge, which get all the kind of starlight on that front. But the other reference point is what they've seen built around them on the edges of towns and villages. Again, horrible stuff, right? Just kind of boxy, ugly. No aesthetics to them, and just as expensive as anything else, and certainly don't come with any infrastructure. So it's not a great reference point, right? And again, building a city is a way to say, look, first of all, it's not a town. So you're right about the scale. This is huge. It's 4.5 times the size of Cambridge itself, the built footprint. And to put it in, for those who know, let's say London, in terms of, it's about the size of Bristol. It's a bit bigger than Bristol. But to put it in terms of London, it stretches from Hampstead to Dulwich. Right, so North London to South London, and in that area, 2 million people live. So that gives you a sense of density if we want 1 million people to live here. But really, what's the difference between a city and a town, right? And the answer is actually pretty simple. A town is a place where people live, and then they commute to somewhere else to work, generally speaking, right?
Yep.
A city contains all of it. And that's the difference. That's the key difference, because it means you've got a center of the place that can be ambitious. It can be a place where, huge employers can come and find people who are themselves ambitious and talented and skilled, etc., and bring that vibrancy to a place and find them and employ them, right? And they know that that's going to be the case. If you've got 1 million people, you've got a decent pool to pick from. So that's the difference, right? It's look, Britain has been deeply unambitious in terms of placemaking for the last 60 years. We haven't built any cities. We haven't barely built any new towns as well. And it's time to take the lessons of the last 60 years and start implementing them, right? And making new places that are beautiful. And we have this, to round this off, we have this in our history. We've been leaders across the world, Britain specifically, building new places and showing the world, all the way from Bath in the Georgian era up to Milton Keynes itself, and garden cities, Letchworth and Welland. They were built in the last century, right? We can do it again, and we will.
No, and I agree. I think this is the thing I think that really comes across in what you guys are trying to do. It's the economic hub that all comes with the housing as well. So it's not just a whole bunch of houses in a field. There's infrastructure, and there's a city that's going to be there. So I think that's amazing. I think it truly is ambitious. It's funny living in Abu Dhabi. We were talking about this before we had the podcast. Just the change in mindset here, where people are just like, do you know what? We're going to build a new island, and we're going to build it over there, and we're going to build 10,000 homes on it, and we're going to start tomorrow. And it seems as though Britain's lost that ability to not even do it, just to think that it can be done. And I think it's the mindset shift, which is so critical at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, look, that goes back to that crisis and policy failure thing, right? A crisis, then, to maybe re-answer that little bit again, it's actually, there's so much of kind of policy failure writ large. It's a sense of confidence that you lose. And that's what makes it a crisis, right? At the end of the day, like, you've lost something inherent to believing in yourself, right? And this is what this crisis is about. We built the Olympics, right? We're the only country in the world to basically make a profitable legacy out of the Olympics, right? Everyone else has failed at doing it, but I live around the corner and it is amazing. From the world's largest fridge mountain, we managed to create an amazing legacy that generates billions for London over a kind of year period, and it got amazing places to live. I lived there myself for a year, directly in it. So we can do this, but you're right. It's sort of, we've forgotten how to do it. And if you have the privilege to travel, you see everyone else doing it and you think, what, we can do it, right? We just like it's absolutely possible. It's just a mindset thing. Absolutely.
Now, the standard political line is that we're in a housing crisis, and the argument seems to be the framing that let's get the people responsible off the hook. Walk me through what you're thinking about why we've gotten here and how do we solve the problem.
So why haven't we inherently kind of built enough homes, right?
Yeah.
It's a number of things. We're basically set up since, post 1945 with the Town and Country Planning Act. The rules were set up and established to say, actually, you can't just build, if you own a piece of land, right, you should be able to just build on what you want, right? So that was the status quo before. And by and large, people did. And actually, you were compensated if you were refused permission. So it worked the other way around, right?
Yeah.
If you can't build your 20 homes, then the council has to say, okay, we'll pay you the money not to do it. Or we'll just have to accept it. That's an interesting way to do things. And it certainly got a lot of stuff built by the private sector pre-1945. After that point, it's the state who had fought, 2 world wars successfully, who said, we'll do all the rebuilding of Britain. Right? You can understand the policy context to all of that. In the 1980s, the state withdrew and stopped doing it. But you've got this framework which still exists, and it's still there, which says only really the state can give itself the permission to build at scale, right? So the private sector was ticking along, and it's still ticking along, but it's not doing the huge amounts of growth. And everyone uses it on the left to say, we should build more council houses. It doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be like, most of our housing stock is actually pre-19, the average age is about 1920s. So a lot of it is Victorian still, right? All that was all the private sector. So that's the kind of policy framework, if you want, that's informed this failure. And then, of course, you've also had a situation where our populations got older, right? So we've ended up with a bunch of people who live in agricultural rural areas who are really old and retired and have loads of time on their hands. And this class of people didn't exist 50 years ago, or didn't exist 30 years ago. They just didn't exist because they're living longer than ever and they're richer than ever. So they act as a default kind of vitocracy, if you want. Matt Clifford, the kind of AI expert and policy expert, talked about this a lot, an entrepreneur himself. And he's dead right? And this is what we talked about in Jilted Generation, that intergenerational dynamic, right? So the people go, no, I don't want it. And they don't have to be responsible for anything else, right?
No,
you just have to say no, and that's it. So those are some of those tensions that has informed. And actually, the worst part is millennials themselves are we're pretty pathetic as a generation. We don't stand up for our rights, and instead we prefer to quiet quit, right? So we kind of leave the country. The best and most talented of my generation, I've seen them all my friends just left the country. They go to Norway and Germany and America. So that's the kind of what's informed it all. But there's so much opportunity, right? On the other hand, we could be building 4.5 million homes and still not run out of demand.
Yeah, you've got to create the opportunities, don't you? And if you don't, people will find an alternative. We've talked about CLT, but from a property investment perspective, what's the relationship between the CLT model and investment returns? So it's a model where owning property in Forest City is still a sensible financial decision for somebody to buy there, or is it just not possible for an investor to purchase a property there?
No, the aim of Forest City is basically to exclude investors. Direct investments for housing and residential. So resi is basically let's not turn that into some cash cow for a bunch of either foreign investors or pensioners again, right? Because they'll win out every time, right? They've got the wealth to be able to leverage and get another mortgage and X, Y, and Z. So the idea is that, no, actually you have to basically have two qualifications, which is ultimately a British passport, because ultimately we're excluding foreign buyers, and it has to be your first home. And it means that money's taken out of the thing that should not really be turned into some, as I said, some kind of cash cow. Housing is just, it's not because I believe that, housing's a human right and blah, blah, blah. It's not a human right, clearly. It's a human need, sure. But it actually makes no economic sense for your country to start trying to make money out of residential property, right? New builds, great. That makes sense. You're investing in creating something new. But generally speaking, people end up as a rentier economy, right? This house that I'm sitting in was built 150 years ago. It's a 3-bed Victorian house. It's terribly built, right? But all of the building material has been paid off. So why is it worth £1 million? It's insane.
Exactly.
It's insane. It's only because someone else has gotten rich off of it and they're banking money off of other people working hard. Well, it's pointless. It's zero productivity increase, right? Nothing's been improved about this place, and yet someone's getting rich off it. It wasn't me. I paid £1 million for it, right? So I'm losing out. And that's the insanity. You want to push capital off into the productive areas of your economy. And buying up old properties and making people pay through the nose for it doesn't make any sense. Let's stop doing it.
Yeah, no, it's, I work on the investment side, but even from my perspective, I understand the need for these sorts of models to exist. Otherwise, you're right, nobody's going to own property.
Yeah, actually, look at Singapore, right? What does it do?
Yep.
It's considered by the right for a very long time to be one of the most dynamic places, low taxes, isn't it brilliant? Neoliberals love Singapore, and rightly so, right? It is massively dynamic, low taxes. Those things are true, but at the heart of it, they made a choice. They said, look, we're a city-state. We're going to own 90% of our land, and we're going to make sure that housing effectively is quietly run in the background, run by, effectively controlled and owned by the state, right?
Yep.
And that frees their citizenry effectively to do more productive things and be entrepreneurial and take risks, right? Because they're not worried about keeping a roof over their heads, and also ensures that the money that goes to the landlord, who's the city, great, plow that money back into infrastructure, building more homes, doing all those things, right? Makes sense.
Absolutely. And actually, when you talk about Singapore, I think the thing that gets lost in Singapore as well, and I speak to people in Singapore every day, is the reality is there are a lot of people in the private rental sector that are now priced out of Singapore, if people can imagine that. So there are people who can no longer afford to rent in the private sector in Singapore. Their HDB is not an option for them, and they're actually now commuting from Johor Bahru, which is in Malaysia, on the other side of the causeway, just to travel to Singapore to get to work. So it's very interesting. I think that, the investment market does need to understand that there's a better model. And I do think that some of these things are really interesting.
Actually, the other thing I was going to say is this housing crisis stuff is going on across the West, right? You mentioned Singapore as well. You could bucket that into the same bracket. But Australia, right? Why does Australia, Sydney in particular, have a housing crisis? It's got a giant continent, right? Yeah. to build on. And, America, again, until very recently, they managed to keep housing pretty low. And then suddenly it's exploded in the last 5 years. There are this isn't just happening in Britain. This is a failure across the West. And lo and behold, we haven't built any new cities in that same time frame, right? So maybe this is a solution.
I agree. Everybody's got essentially the same issue. Australia's a good example where, in fact, Australia, I think a lot of people in the UK don't realise Australia is much worse than the UK. So the cost of housing is much more expensive than the UK. Adelaide, which is where I'm from, the rental vacancy at one point was 0.1%. So I think people struggle to imagine what that's like. But essentially, in a city of just over 1 million people, to go and find a property to rent, you are probably looking at, generally speaking, 20 or 30 properties available for rent across the entire suburb area that you're looking for. It's absolutely bananas. And a lot of it is, I agree, the capital has not been pushed to build new housing. And what does capital do? It goes for the best possible option. In reality, a lot of it is the secondary market.
I remember speaking at the Sydney Opera House must have been give or take around 2012, and going on Quanda, Q&A, right? And talking about all of this, and then hearing from the audience, talking about what Britain was doing and talking about jilted generation, and what was happening in the UK. And they were saying, even then, oh yeah, our housing's gone up too, and it's getting pretty expensive. So, people have known about this for a long time and done nothing, which is an outrage.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. I think this is why I like what you're doing so much, because, as I say, it's an audacious plan. It's it's monumental in terms of size and scale. And the reality is like you say, I mean, if you look at Australia, New Zealand, Canada, UK, the dynamics are all very similar. And the reality is we've had years and years of nobody doing anything to solve the problems, and essentially just layering one problem on top of each other. And one of the issues I sort of hear a lot from people on Twitter is, look, we'll just give people a stamp duty incentive. Well, guess what? That's literally like putting kerosene on the fire. It's absolutely bananas. You need to fix the issues below the surface in order to make things improve. So whilst I appreciate this, that there's a lot of people that won't like what you're trying to do, the reality is the thing I love about it is that you're bringing energy and focus to an area that I've worked in housing for forever. There is essentially nothing. And the reality is if people keep doing what's been done before that hasn't worked, then the reality is we're going to get exactly the same results.
Yep. And look, I'll say one other thing about why this is very particularly different. How housing is built currently in the UK is, these little local regions to come up with their local plans. And they're quite small. They're mandated to build maybe 1,000 homes a year, right? So you can get this kind of scale, right? So no one thinks like that normally, right? In these kind of little pockets, right? Because that's not how people operate. They move and shift for work and family relationships and the like. So they have a call for sites to private developers, and private developers go, oh, we could build here, we could build there. And of course, then what happens is no one wants to build the infrastructure, right? Because that's very costly. It's not going to make you any money. But it is going to unlock, generally speaking, the commonality of more housing, more land to be built on and created. So what we've done is to say, you know what, screw all of that. It clearly isn't delivering, right? We've ended up with an infrastructure crisis. So you've ended up with houses in Cambridge that are new, right? You walk in, you turn the tap on, no water comes out because there's no water, right? No one's built a reservoir. That's basically it, right? No one's built a reservoir for over 30 years in Britain writ large. It's nuts. So we've said, look, let's just do it all in one place, right? Why don't we just, yes, the housing is there, of course, but if you're going to build 370,000, 400,000 homes, well, you're definitely going to need, and you're going to have the resources to pay for the reservoir, right? The requisite energy, a small modular reactor to power 1 million homes, not just 400,000. And then the transport, right? And you're like, great. And because it's greenfield, right? There are 8,000 people who live in this plot, but it's technically, if you want a greenfield site, it's a lot cheaper to build a tram system, to build a metro system, than it would be to retrofit it into nearby Cambridge with its medieval streets. Yep. So, that's the other prospect. You're doing a lot in one place. You can build then the hospitals and the schools. There's natural demand for it. Again, thinking at scale brings its own massive benefits, right? And unlocks a whole new paradigm of thinking. Absolutely.
Now, you sort of touched on something I was going to talk about. With all of these things, people are going to disagree with what you're doing. There's going to be some detractors. That's just part of development. So one of the things that's sort of come up a lot, I think, on my conversation with people on Twitter about Forest City, is that people talk about the environmental impact. And what would you say to those people, and how would you explain to them the benefits of what you're doing relative to what you're taking away?
So, look, if you just want to have just a rational argument, and it usually isn't that. Usually people put forward arguments, especially if they're from the area, but it ultimately comes down to, I agree with your ideas, they're sort of sensible, but just not here, right? I don't want it to ruin and change my area, as they would see it, right? And that's entirely acceptable. But just to come back to the point about nature, yes. So it's agricultural land. It's actually I'll give you this example. The tree cover in the Suffolk part of the site is 8.9%, right? Which is terrible. London has almost twice that in terms of trees. So you get an idea. Look, agriculture, no one likes to talk about it, right? But basically it's farming that's made Britain one of the most nature depleted countries on the planet. It takes up about 2/3 of our land area, right? And urban land is 9%. And that includes the gardens and the canals and the parks, right? Yep. So they actually built over bits like 3 or 4%. So you can see the disparity. People go, oh, it's all the building that kills all the animals. No, it's not. It's the farming, right? It just removes the habitats for nature, for insects especially. So using a quarter of the plot to say we're going to create this huge amount of open and available space, right? That is basically, it's a bit like Epping Forest if you've been there, or Hatfield. It's what's known technically as kind of medieval woodland, right? So it's not just thick forest, right? It's a bit of that mixed in with marsh and field and meadows and the like. So it should replicate and be a home for the environment and nature that's already there. We've plotted it in a way that incorporates all the trees, all the triple SSIs, as they're known, sites of scientific interest. And more than that, it'll be available to the public in a way that it just isn't now. You can't walk over these fields, right? Yeah. So we will completely change the uplift in terms of nature that's available. It'll be a massive legacy. So anyone who's an ecologist goes, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, right? If you like looking at a field that is farmed, then you won't like this. You'll have more trees, right? And people have told me that. They say, I don't want more trees. It'll ruin my view.
You can't keep everybody happy, I guess, is the moral to the story. So just before we go, what's the sort of timing? How does it work? What's next? What's the sort of timeline? What's the government process? What's the public process for delivering the site? And when a shovel's on the ground, when do the first houses come out?
So the idea is that a ceremonial spade will certainly go into the ground by 2029. That's the very ambitious timeline we've set ourselves, which means we've got to do a lot of the master planning beforehand, almost all of it. And it's a very, very long list of things that we need to complete in that time. So it's certainly not easy. We did it with the Olympics. Again, Olympics are a much smaller site, but nevertheless, it can be done. If you give yourself a deadline, people can achieve a lot of things. Often these things don't have deadlines, and that's actually the problem. So in terms of the route to delivery, right, it's true, problematic, because it's so big, no one knows what to do with it in government. And kind of regional players are like, well, where does this sit? And I'm like, well, maybe it should be its own special kind of framework. People are like, I'm not sure, Shiv, about, being special all the time for everything. So we think we found another route, which isn't the New Towns program, and we're working on that at the moment. But where it should naturally sit is this new framework called the Spatial Development Strategies, which are yet to come into effect. They kick in the autumn, but it means talking to the regional powers, they now have to come up with long-term plans for their whole region, not just the little local plans, right? So it's Cambridge and Peterborough, and it's the whole of Suffolk, right? What are these areas, which are much larger than just simply, either mid Suffolk or West Suffolk or whatever it might be. So that's really where we're the route we're kind of now going down.
Okay.
And try to get buy-in on. Yeah.
And so I'm sure one of the sets of comments that I'm going to get, and I know because I can preempt what people are going to say. I've worked with most of the major house builders in the UK. They've all got their different things about them that they do, but they're all very similar, and they all have a very similar approach to life and what they do. And I know that two things are going to come. Developers are going to be upset that you're building properties next to their developments where you're effectively half the price. That's something they need to deal with. That's the market. But you're also going to have a lot of people saying, Shiv and Joe, they've never built a building before. They've never done a development. And the first one that they're going to do is 45,000 acres with 400 houses. That's a large place to start. What do you say to those people?
Well, so look, they're right. I don't have any development experience, and nor did Seb Coe. He didn't build an Olympic stadium before he started advocating for the Olympics, right? I mean, I guess he was a runner, but I'm also someone who understands housing need, right? I guess, and the economics of that. But more importantly, more interestingly, Ebenezer Howard, who created the Garden Cities movement, he'd never built, and he was a journalist as well beforehand. So we can, people can do extraordinary things. I guess I'm not saying that I'm in that bracket, but yeah, sure, this is us trying to, as I said, repair the social contract, and this is the way to do it. And more importantly is, can we identify the talent and bring that on board to actually get this done? And the last bit to say is that we're not actually the builders of this thing. We're here to set all the plans in motion and make sure that it's viable and it's sort of shovel ready and ready to go. And then, of course, actual builders will come in and do that, and it will require the biggest construction firms, not just in the UK, but in the world, to participate in all of that. So we understand that, Joe and I, and we're both fairly entrepreneurial in our own ways. We've both had startups, and Joe's been very successful at that as well. So what was the other part of your question in terms of bona fides?
So I would say, well, that's the main one. I would say that's the main part.
Oh, the half-price development. You're right about the developers, right? They're already getting upset with us, and that was the bit that being disruptive. People say, "Oh, it's such a disruptor to the market," right? And I'm like, what does that really kind of mean? I'm like, we're just kind of creating a fuss. It's not. It means that when we're getting to the root of it, it means that people who are in the area are getting annoyed. Because
absolutely.
we will destroy 15 years of pipeline if we come about. And for me, that's great. That's exactly what disruption is. Can we actually deliver at scale and actually create housing that's actually affordable, right? Not technically affordable, right? 20% off of market rates. It's still unaffordable because housing's so expensive, right? It's a 4-bedroom house for an old home is £1 million plus in Cambridge, right? In the center of the city.
Easy.
If you want some kind of quality of life and you don't want to spend your life in traffic, right? And if you want to go and spend your life in traffic, then yes, you can pay £650,000. This sucks. All of it sucks. It's rubbish. It's absolutely rubbish. And people can't build beyond that. I literally create a better life, right? Is a failure on them, not on us in that sense.
Absolutely. And I would actually say to that, we're quite familiar with some of the developments there at a sort of institutional sales level. And I would say even at an institutional sales level at discounts in the magnitude that you've talked about from those asking prices, it still doesn't work, because the one issue with a lot of these developments is price, right? That's the reality is we've made housing too expensive in the UK relative to the average wage. And that you can boil housing down to that. And actually, the other part of the answer that I would say to people if I were you in your shoes is that the reality is the housing battle for a lot of these things is actually principally political. It really is. It's people know how to build things. People have been building things for a very long period of time. It's very easy to bring skills in to do all sorts of things. Like bricklayers are technically very skilled, but the reality is there's lots of people who can do it. The reality, I think, the challenge with a lot of these things, and what's what I've seen in Abu Dhabi a lot, is it's the ability to get things done before anything starts. To say, well, we want a road there, so I'm just going to call the person to say, we need a highway to connect this island to this island because we know there's a traffic issue. And I know how to call the person to tell them that the road's coming and get an answer within 30 minutes. Yeah, and that's the bit the UK's lost in my...
Right. Exactly. And so that's how I would approach the problem. That's what I do. I just ring up the chief engineer of whatever, right? And I'm unabashed at doing that. And as a journalist, that's what I used to do anyway. So I'm quite au fait at that skill. What I'm told, though, is, and what everyone else does is, well, you have to actually fill out the requisite form and apply to this framework and wait 2 years until the, section whatever needs to be filled out. And this planning consultancy kind of process runs its course over the next 5 years. What? We don't have time. Just ring the guy up, right? Ring the person up and go, let's do this. And then they go, yeah, okay, all right. Yeah. They're kind of caught off guard. And it's brilliant, right? Get things done. And actually, we did it with the Olympics again, right? And we just kind of lost that ability. Again, deadlines, certainty around all of this. Let me just take you, I kind of want to say, look, if we unpack it, first of all, let me get some practical stuff, because we talked in the abstract, right? What are we actually doing to bring to deliver and get that absorption rate up, right? So, because that's actually really crucial for any scheme success.
Absolutely.
The one, on the actual cost of the house. So we're building a stone-faced, 160 meters squared, 4-bedroom terraced house. We've got Amin Taha. So this just came out in the Financial Times. It was announced a few days over the weekend from when this podcast is being recording on the 17th of June. And he's a double award nominated for the Sterling Prize architect, and a robotics startup firm in Walthamstow. They've raised 9 million plus, so they're really well funded and actually very well along on their journey to build the skeleton of the house, the paneling and the wood paneling out of wood. But it will be faced with stone, so it'll look beautiful, and that's coming together now. And we hope to have a demonstrator up in Cambridge, probably by the end of this year, give or take.
Wow.
Yeah. So it will be something people will be able to visit, to see, to touch, to feel, to look, to wander around in, and brilliant. And we hopefully get people signed up to living in Forest City premised on that alone. So that's the first thing. Can you get the cost of this house down? Of course, there's lots of housing modalities. It'll be matching blocks and, penthouse apartments and skyscrapers and the like. And of course, smaller homes than just 4-bedroom terraced houses. But that's the prototypical housing type that we're dealing with at the moment. Then there's the cost of the land, right? Agricultural land costs 9,000 an acre, right? This site's pretty well agglomerated already. There's about, 10, 12 landowners who own the majority of the site. So we're talking to all of them. It won't be, we'll get it at certainly multiples of agricultural rates, but not, 400,000 an acre, right? Which is what would kill any scheme, let alone 2 million or 10 million on the edge of towns and cities currently. And yes, then with a development corporation comes compulsory purchase. So that's the stick we hope to never use. And most of the landowners are talking to us right now. So then the third part, so you've got the cost of their house, the land, and then you've got the permission, right? That politics part. So it is to use ultimately to ask the government for the regional powers to create a development corporation, right? It's the speed, the tool that allows you in Britain to basically both compulsory purchase land, but more importantly than that, actually be your own planning authority. So you don't have to go to someone else and be at their behest. That makes speed and assurance of delivery. And that is ultimately absolutely key in Britain, where everyone believes it'll take forever. So HS2 didn't have this, right? And has failed because of it. The Olympics did, Milton Keynes did, Canary Wharf did, right? You need that speed of delivery and that legal structure to work within. It's absolutely crucial. But you need something big enough to warrant it. A city is that. And the last bit is the infrastructure, right? So how do we get the cost of the infrastructure down? Because that is, unlike other schemes, which just kind of feed off existing infrastructure, right? To the point where it's at capacity and there's no more water coming out of the taps. That's the big capex for the scheme, and that needs to be offset, therefore, against the commercial value of commercial land, 8,000 acres of it. So that's the balancing act financially. We've totted up, it's about 46 billion, including a small modular reactor.
Wow.
Greenfield at scale should give us that cost and efficiency. And of course, having all the other things that I've talked about should give us the efficiency to deliver at European rates of building, not UK rates of infrastructure costs. So that's basically, there's 4 elements, right? To recap: the cost of the housing, the permission, the land, and the infrastructure. We think we've got them all down because it's a city, ultimately.
I do think actually one of the things we've talked about in the past as well, which I think is really important too, which I think gets lost a lot with housing development, is actually the absorption rate. Because what you're not trying to do is push the pricing. And what I think most people don't understand, sort of our world, is that it's a battle with developers to work out how much discount do they need to give to an institutional investor to buy all of it, and versus how much margin they get, relative to how quickly can they sell it in the open market at full pricing, and at what rate, and when does the financing destroy the return? And I think that's the question that this answers, that I think a lot of people probably gloss over, which is really important. And if you look at somewhere like London, the reason that most things don't get built at the moment, other than all of the other issues that exist, is the reality is an institutional investor wants so much discount to make their margin return from the yield that they're generating that the developer can't price it in. And at the other end of the equation, they just can't sell them quickly enough at the moment to actually make it make sense. So they'll have stock inventory for 12 months post completion, which is burning a hole in their cash flow. And I think the key thing behind what you're doing, other than obviously the scale, is the ability to drive pricing through your CLT structure, which really drives performance. And I guess one more thing that I really wanted to pick up on as well, which I thought was quite interesting, was, is there any other residential site in the UK at the moment that has a small modular nuclear reactor?
To answer that, no. There is no certainly Rolls-Royce version of it in existence. They don't exist. So that's a great question. I'll stick to answering that, which is, look, the quandary for us was, is it possible for a municipality to own its own small modular reactor, right? It's clearly not going to be feasible for, let's say Manchester or even London to own Sizewell, right? Or build and kind of create its own, right? Leave aside the distances from population, all sorts of other things. Like it's just too big, a capex thing, outlay. But small modular reactors come in at about 2.7 billion. That's feasible, right? And actually, the cost of running those is about 100 million a year. So again, imagine you've got 1 million people. Well, that's £100, right? Divided between them. I mean, that's incredibly crude, but you get the idea. So it is possible, but legally speaking, it's not possible. There is no current framework for a private entity, in effect, to own an SMR. I mean, it would be a local government authority, in effect, right? That would run it. But so that is a quandary. Just to go back to your first point, though, you're right. Persimmon, Redrow, they're all discounting their houses right now, right? Vistry their share price is tanked. And they're facing now voluntary redundancies, and they've got 3 modular factories that are just, presumably somewhat sitting quiet, right? You know that from the numbers.
Absolutely.
Right, it's insane because they've obviously invested loads into making housing work, and yet, right, what's going wrong? And yet, on the other side, you've got massive demand. You've got millions of young adults living with their parents, and they want to buy homes. So what is going wrong? Right? It's insane. And the answer is very simple. We just don't build on agricultural land. There is no other way out of squaring the circle, right? If you keep building on the edge of towns, you will pay too much for land, too much for everything else. You have to solve this at scale. It's the only way to do it.
Yeah, no, I actually agree. I think that it is realistically, as much as I sort of, obviously coming from the investment side of things, we like driving values. But the reality is if you're actually looking for what is in the best interest of the UK, it's to provide housing to young people, because the thing that I really like about what you're trying to do is it solves a much bigger problem in the UK that I think people just don't recognise enough, which is, I see it every day. I live in Abu Dhabi. I see people coming off the boat, even in the middle of a war, moving to the UK, to Abu Dhabi from the UK. And the reality is they fall in 2 buckets. Just generally speaking, they're entrepreneurs saying, look, do you know what? Nothing works. I've got quite a lot of money. I'm going to move my family, my business, everything over here, and I'm going to stop paying tax in the UK. And I'm going to pay tax in the UAE, but it's a lot less.
0.
There's nothing you can do to stop those people. They are where they are. But the bigger issue that I see a lot of is, and you see it with the big developers here, all of their staff are from Redrow, Barratt's, Barclays, Persimmon, Vistry, Crest, you name it. And there's this skilled talent that is relocating from the UK. It's coming over here because they can build like Billy-O and nobody's stopping them. They can do whatever they want. And there's lots of jobs and lots of work for them. And the other big group of people is when you walk into any school in the UAE, it's full of British teachers. And for as long as the UK cannot provide opportunities to those people, the best and brightest will leave. That's just the reality of life. So the UK needs to do so, as does Australia and New Zealand, but the UK really needs to do something, because I think of all of the advanced economies in the world, or Western economies, whatever you'd like to say, the UK is by far in the worst position. So it's got more ground to make up.
You've just got to have an offer, right? Which is why I talk about repairing that social contract. You've got to have, what's the point of working, right? And
Exactly.
the answer used to be, you can buy a house, right? And live with your friends and your family and social connections. And some people don't care about that stuff, right? They're like, it's fine. I've got loose social connections and my capital's kind of low on that basis, the social capital. It's fine. I'm happy to move and migrate. There'll always be those people, as you say. But for those who are tied to this country, it's a real wrench, right? To leave. But they're forced to do so. I've watched it myself for a decade and a half, right? It's causing knock-on effects. And people are getting depressed because they're best friends. As you know, raising kids, it requires a huge social network to do that well and properly, right? But they're like, look, I'm a lawyer, I'm a partner in a law firm, and all I'm getting is a 2.5 bedroom on a main road in Walthamstow, and that's it. And we'll never get better than that. What the hell? We'll just move to France, pay €1,500 a month, and we'll get a house with a swimming pool.
Yeah, absolutely, and they'll do it easily.
And they are. Just every week, every month, I hear a new story from my social network, and it's awful. We've just got to offer something better. And look, I get angry with both millennials who are passive and quiet quitting, in effect, their country and not doing anything about it, right? But that's sort of like victim blaming a bit, if you want. And then there's also pensioners who are just very happy to live off the state with their state pension and triple lock and their winter fuel payments and everything like that. And they get all the power but no responsibility. They don't have to. It's fine. The country would be fine. We worked hard all our lives, right? And that's the lecture you get. You're like, well, this is your country too, and you're leaving it. You're the first generation in British history for 150 years to leave the country worse off. Do you feel any shame? The answer is no. Like, go on another cruise, right? And that's what really upsets me.
Yeah, it's got to change. Something's got to give. Shiv, before we go, is there anything else you want to pass on to people watching about what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I think, look, it's also, if we can unlock this, and I think we will, I'm feeling pretty confident that because this is such a big thing, it offers a lot to a lot of people, right? It isn't just 5,000 homes. And we'd face the same amount of kind of pushback if we'd building 5,000 homes or 400,000 homes. So aim bigger, right? Once we unlock this, it'll start to, I think, just change and adapt the country. And so I think people out there, exactly as you say, looking at Britain, who have either they're Anglophiles or they come from Britain, watch this space, watch how we progress. All right, it's time to kind of fight back and get Britain back on its feet, and we will do it. We'll do it, and this will start to unlock a new era of Brit-maxing, if you want.
Good luck with it. Well,
Thanks.
Really appreciate coming on our podcast today. We'll watch what you're doing and keep reporting back. And we wish you all the best with it, and we hope you do a great job, and we really wish that you succeed with what you're trying to do.
Thank you, Ashley. It's been really humbling to be
Cheers.
part of this, so thank you.
Thank you very much.